Well, this weekend, we had 20,000 Mexicans protesting America in Mexico City. They were protesting the increased deportations, but we'll see that isn't the case, according to the foreign minister. Now, they marched to the capital of Mexico. They carried Mexican flags. Interestingly enough, they weren't carrying American flags. That would be, they'd probably get beaten if they were doing that there, but they were carrying piñatas. They had a woman who's holding up a banner. You can see here, many of the banners, most of the banners that are there are in Spanish. Maybe they should press 1 for English. Never mind. We don't really care what you think about our laws and about our foreign policy. And why don't you do the same thing there? And of course, they're saying, well, we're going to be here. We're protesting. This is a university professor in Mexico saying we want to demonstrate to all those who suffer discrimination in the United States that we are with them. Just as the Mexican government has been telling people who are here illegally, telling their citizens who have come into our country, staying here illegally, demanding rights, demanding services that we pay for with our taxes, telling them how to subvert our laws, and then putting up piñatas of Trump and beating them. Well, you know what? America is not going to be your piñata anymore. You're not going to beat us to get the free candy. That's just not going to happen. Nevertheless, as they're saying that people are panicking here and having these demonstrations there, we've got the Mexican ambassador, foreign minister rather, saying in an interview on television that Trump's deportations are actually slightly lower than Obama's. Nevertheless, as the Daily Caller points out, there is widespread panic amongst the liberals, being fed by people like the Washington Post, who say fear and panic have gripped America's immigrant community as reports circulate that federal agents have become newly aggressive under President Trump. This is being echoed by the Chicago Tribune. It's being echoed by Amnesty International, by the ACLU, etc. They're creating this meme. And so now we see here in Austin, we have the Austin Teachers Union. You know, Austin is now a sanctuary city, just as Dallas and Houston have declared themselves to be sanctuary cities in defiance of the governor as well as the president. We now have the Austin Teachers Union handing out a flyer. What to do if ICE comes to your door. They're handing this out to the students who, many of them are here illegally, getting free educations that the Mexican government will not pay for their citizens, but tell them to come to America and we'll help you get a free education at the expense of the American taxpayer. They're dreamers. Our dream used to be having an American home. That used to be the American dream. But now that's going to be sacrificed for the dreams of people who aren't even citizens in our country. They say the labor group is Education Austin, and the flyers were United We Dream. There you go. They have their dream. What to do when ICE comes to your door. They say it's unclear how many teachers gave out the flyers or whether or not they were provided during school hours. We'll take a guess. Of course, they were put out during school hours. They say federal law requires schools to educate students regardless of their immigration status. Hear that, Mr. President Trump? You need to change that law right now. And then they go on to say it's unclear how many undocumented students are in the Austin School District, but there are 30,000 English language learners and about 1,000 refugee children in the school system. And I got to tell you, living here in the Austin area, I'm seeing my property taxes go up like my insurance rates under Obamacare. And I'm not very happy about it. And you shouldn't put up with this either. Meanwhile, Donald Trump took a lot of flack for saying that they're bad hombres down in Mexico. Well, you know what? A lot of those bad hombres aren't just drug cartels. They're government workers, government police, the federales themselves. This is corruption that has been going on for over 100 years. We used to have Westerns about it all the time. But now we got Mexican cops sentenced for kidnapping and murdering ranchers and cowboys. These are two former cops that have been sentenced to 40 and 45 years in prison, respectively. They're convicted of kidnapping and murdering 3 cattlemen from one area in Mexico. The cowboys are moving about 300 head of cattle to the border. Court records don't reveal if they kidnapped them for ransom or why they did it. However, what they did to the 3 cowboys that were killed, they discovered the bodies and the victims inside a vehicle. The victims had been handcuffed and shot in the head. So you see, we don't want that kind of corruption coming to America. And we don't appreciate that kind of hypocrisy. Meanwhile, we see yet another bill that has been introduced about protesters blocking the road. And I have to say, we need to come up with a bumper sticker that says, "I don't break for protesters." This all started back in North Dakota, and we'll tell you why it started. And I had a poll about it. About 11,000 people took a poll on my Twitter account on this, and most people don't agree that it's okay to block the road with your bodies. But of course, this started in North Dakota. And here's the frustration that they had. Well, let me tell you about the new bill that just got introduced today. Bill is proposed in Tennessee that says people who happen to hit a protester blocking traffic will be immune from civil suits brought against them by that protester. Senator Bill Catron introduced the bill that protects motorists from civil lawsuits should they accidentally hit somebody. It doesn't protect you from a lawsuit if you do it intentionally. Of course, the protesters are there intentionally. They're creating a traffic hazard intentionally. And if you have to suddenly stop for these people, you get rear-ended, or maybe you have to swerve to get out of the road, or maybe you are attacked when you stop. What do you do at that point? And this is what he had to say. He said, just because, this is the local news saying this, just because they're starving for attention doesn't entitle them to try and get attention from people who are trying to go about their day. But of course, they're not just trying to get attention. They're not just delaying you. They're also endangering you. Here's an example of this. Of course, it was about a month ago, as I said, in North Dakota, we saw the first one of these bills. And it was because of frustration of the long, prolonged protests there in the Standing Rock area. They say, and at that time, there was a bill that was introduced that would protect drivers from legal consequences if they inadvertently, again, accidentally, hit, injure, or kill pedestrians who are obstructing traffic. They say the legislation at the time, a month ago, was a direct response to the massive protests that had shut down a nearby highway, listen to this, for months this was going on, and stalled construction of a pipeline to carry crude oil. Okay, and I have to say to the people that are there, when you do this for months, you are not winning the hearts and minds. As a matter of fact, you're not winning anything. You're losing. You're losers, because they said, regardless of where people stand, and this is the Washington Post reported at the time, they said regardless of where these legislators stand on this pipeline, whether they support it or oppose it, they're sick and tired of these protesters. All of us are sick and tired of them. And so they said this has gone on for over a year. And in this Washington Post story, they talk about how the mother-in-law of this legislator inspired him to do this bill. And here's what he had to say. He said, this bill is not about oil. We're ranchers. We're conservationists. But he said there's a fine line between protesting and terrorism, and what we're dealing with was terrorism out there. Drivers who were legally doing their business or just going home, all of a sudden they're in a situation that they don't want to be in. And you know, as you've seen these protesters everywhere that George Soros organizes, that they get very violent. And that's why he's saying this actually was terrorizing. He said his 72-year-old mother-in-law was driving on Highway 1806 when suddenly she found herself swarmed by protesters, chanting, holding signs, and she told her legislator son-in-law they were jumping in front of her car. He stressed that he's not trying to legalize vehicular manslaughter in the state of North Dakota. He said drivers still have to do what they can to avoid protesters, but he said the First Amendment gives people the right of freedom to assemble peacefully, but it also gives people the right to ignore that protest. And, you know, you don't have, as we've said before, free speech means that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't endanger people with your free speech. It's about political speech. It's about trying to convince people. It's about expressing an opinion. But of course, we see these people don't have an opinion on anything except that everybody except them is a racist, or they're trying to destroy the world or whatever. I mean, they don't want to argue about anything. They just want to shut down speech. They want to interfere with people. And you cannot set the theater on fire. It's even worse than saying there's a fire in the theater. They're trying to set the theater on fire and then say that's protected under the First Amendment.
Welcome to America. 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 Man, I die for America. I served my time for America. Got shot back, went to war, got back, and ain't nobody give a jack in America.